All right. Good noon, everybody, and welcome back to God Was Here, our study of the life of Christ as recorded in the books of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Appreciate you bearing with me as we had to take a small break last week, but we're going to jump right back into some of these last recorded teachings of Christ before we get into the last week of his life. And we're pretty much done with those in Matthew and Mark's account, at least by the way I reckon it. So we're going to be going into Luke's account here. And we are going to pretty much be entirely within chapter 14. So if you want to go ahead and turn there, that's where we'll be camping out. We're going to go ahead and try to knock out 3 of these teachings. 2 of them are parables and one's a lot more literal, although it does have some parable-like qualities. But we'll get there when we get there. Luke chapter 14, and we're going to start in verse 7. Now he told a parable to those who were invited when he noticed how they chose their places of honor, saying to them, "When you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in a place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than yourself be invited by him. And he who invited you both will come and say to you, 'Give your place to this person,' and then you will begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, 'Friend, move up higher.' Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at a table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted." All right. Jesus apparently has been invited to somebody's home, and he sees how people seat themselves. Now, a lot of what we're seeing here is culturally dependent, but not entirely. There's a lot of things here that are relatable for us. So I'm going to try to use as much of that as possible, but briefly, let's go ahead and talk about the things that are culturally dependent. You have to understand that in this ancient Near Eastern culture, there is a lot more emphasis placed upon where somebody is sitting in a feast, not just a wedding feast, but in any feast, than there is today. You'll see this later on within the New Testament, when some of the New Testament writers have to admonish the church because of how they're sitting. Particularly, you have one incident where the church is admonished because if somebody rich shows up, then we want to give him the best seat at the very front. Now, if you were to look at the modern Western church, you might come up with the exact opposite conclusion, that the place of honor is at the back. But it's not really so much about honor so much as convenience, how we're focused on how we sit. That being said, the fact that he uses a parable of a wedding feast, it's understandable to a point even for us, because we do have places of honor in our weddings, don't we? It would be pretty incredible if someone were, just any random wedding guest were to go up and sit at the place that has been reserved for the wedding party, in the embarrassing situation that Jesus described would probably happen to them, maybe even more so in our culture, because we know who is expected to sit at that spot. Well, in a similar manner, Jesus says this: when you're invited to a wedding feast, go and sit at the worst spot, not the best spot. A difference that we might expect from our wedding receptions to their wedding feasts is that in the wedding reception, usually, at least in my experience, people pretty much have assigned seats. And so breaking that rule at all would be an embarrassment. That appears not to have been the case in the New Testament world here. Instead, you just sort of sit where you think you ought to go. Now, Jesus explains an embarrassing situation. What if somebody has thought too highly of themselves and is going to be humbled? Well, that would be a humiliating situation. How do you stop that from happening then? You go and you sit in the least honorable spot, and then you are honored in the presence of all if the host of the wedding says, "Friend, move up closer." This is an interesting bit too as well, because he's not just talking about spiritual. There's actually some practical advice here. If you want to be honored by somebody, don't honor yourself. If you refuse to honor yourself, and it is necessary that you be honored, then you make it so that somebody else honors you. This is just some practical social advice, to be honest. If you want to appear as humble, act humbly, and the humility itself will honor you. This goes very close to what Jesus taught a little bit earlier in our lessons, when we see that he said that the first should be last and the last should be first. But if we apply it to those previous teachings, then we also understand something else that's pretty important, which is that there is spiritual truth to it as well. It might be the case, because I don't think he's trying to give us a 100% this is always true sort of statement. It might be the case that nobody ever exalts you where you have humbled yourself in this lifetime. And we know from the other teachings of Christ, that's perfectly okay. God sees everything, and he will honor the humbled. Okay, that's the first one. Let's look at this next one. He said to the man who had invited him, this is Luke 14, beginning in verse 12. He said to the man who had invited him, "When you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you. For you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just." This teaching is a lot different than the one from before, because the one from before has practical social advice. This is not practical social advice, but it is extremely practical spiritual advice. Jesus says this to the man who had invited him to the feast. And I'm not sure if there's a critical tone here or not, but it's hard to imagine that there isn't. Nevertheless, he says to the man, when you throw a feast, don't just invite your social equals, the people who can later pay you back. You know, you come to my house, we'll have a feast, we'll have a good time, and I know that later on you're going to repay the favor. Don't do the whole favor for favor things. If you want to be blessed by God, then invite the people who can't pay you back. If they can't be paid back in this life, you will be paid back in the next by God. You will be blessed in the resurrection, is what Jesus says. Verse 15. Then one of those who reclined at table with him heard these things. He said to him, "Blessed is everyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God." There's a lot of the culture present within this chapter, isn't it? That reclining at the table indicates they were probably eating in the Roman style, which was to recline and lean on one side on a couch while you ate. Anyway, he says, "Blessed is everyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God." Gotta tell you, I don't have the first clue what that guy meant by that. Someone smarter than I can probably tell you. One of the indications that it's not too hard to find somebody smarter, by the way, is that I said someone smarter than I instead of someone smarter than me, which would be the correct way to say it. Verse 16. But he said to him, "A man once gave a great banquet and invited many. And at that time, for the banquet, he sent his servant to say to those who had been invited, 'Come, for everything is now ready.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said to him, 'I have bought a field, and I must go out and see it. Please have me excused.' And another said, 'I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I go to examine them. Please have me excused.' And another said, 'I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come.' So the servant came and reported these things to his master. Then the master of the house became angry and said to his servant, 'Go out quickly to the streets and lanes of the city, and bring in the poor and crippled and blind and lame.' And the servant said, 'Sir, what you have commanded has been done, and still there is room.' And the master said to the servant, 'Go out to the highways and the hedges and compel people to come in, that my house may be filled. For I tell you, none of those men who were invited shall taste my banquet.'" So what do we see happening here? This is the parable that Jesus gives. There's a man who is the master over a house. He lets everybody know he's going to be giving a huge banquet, and he invites all of his friends. And they each come up with excuses. Let's look at what these excuses were again, by the way. "I have bought a field, and I must go and see it." Next one, "I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I must go examine them." The third one, "I have married a wife and cannot come." So I got a new field. I got to go look at it. I bought some new oxen. I got to go look at them. I married a new wife. Let me ask you something. Do any of these sound like particularly good excuses? Keeping in mind, by the way, that a cultural difference on our end, I don't think they were really in the habit of having honeymoons at this time. So keeping all that in mind, you'll notice that each of these are pretty terrible excuses. Each of these, again, with a slight exception to that last one, is something that can wait till later. And in that last one, you're more than welcome, I'm sure, to bring your wife with you. They're making up excuses, which is it's a slap in the face in our culture, but it's a particular slap in the face in that culture. It's just as important to accept somebody else's hospitality as it is to give hospitality in that culture. So it's a slap in the face what's going on here. So that's why the master becomes angry, and he says to the servant, go to the lame, the blind, and the poor and bring them in instead. So, when you're reading into this much, you might think that Jesus is talking about the exact same thing he said to the master of the house. But he's not. You read on, because the servant says, there's still room. And then he says, go out to the highways and talk to all the strangers, the travelers, and bring them in as well. But none of those who are initially invited shall taste my feast. And it's then we begin to understand he's talking about something new entirely. This is actually a condemnation of the Jewish elite at the time. The master of the house is Jesus, who is bringing in this New Testament, the new kingdom of God that is supposed to be coming in. Those who reject him are the Jewish elite, the scholars, those who are supposed to be religious experts who have not actually prepared themselves, and for ridiculous reasons, they don't accept this new kingdom. So this is a condemnation. Who are the blind, the poor, the lame? This is probably the most literal. These are the lower class Jews, those who should not have been the very first to accept, unlike those Jewish elites, but they end up being the ones who accept this. And then, of course, we know from our history a little bit later, it's not just going to be those who are not Jewish elites, but it's also going to be Gentiles. Those are who are represented by those going off in the highway. And the irony that Jesus is teaching is that instead of those who should have known best, those who have been studying the message most, those who should have accepted first, they don't accept at all. But those who you would least expect, those are the ones who are going to end up entering the kingdom of God. So what he's doing is he's describing the growth of the church. It is not the Jewish elite. Those end up being the first persecutors of the church, but rather the Jewish lower classes and the Gentiles who will make up the kingdom of God. Those Jewish elites who were first most concerned with being there for the kingdom of God, looking for that kingdom of God, they end up rejecting the whole thing. That's what's being taught here. All right. Let's look into one more. This one is not a parable, but it is a teaching, beginning in verse 25. Now great crowds accompanied him, and he turned and said to them. This, by the way, seems to indicate we're no longer dealing with this dining room scene. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king, going out to encounter another king in war, will not sit down first and deliberate whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who come against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is yet a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. Jesus teaches a couple of extreme things here. And we have to understand what he means, because there is reason to think that the immediate meaning of it is probably not what he actually means, right? Whoever does not hate father and mother is not worthy of me. Well, this is a problem, right? Because we have command in the Bible to love and honor our father and mother. Look at Ephesians. Children, obey your parents. It is pretty clear we're supposed to love and honor our parents. So what does he mean when he says if you don't hate father and mother? Well, he doesn't mean hate in the traditional sense. And of course, this also violates the command to love your neighbor as yourself. Your father and mother count. He doesn't mean hate in the traditional sense. He means hate in comparison to God. What we mean by that is this. Your priority should first and always be God. A lot of people are baptized into Christ, and they aren't able to stay because they didn't realize that this was going to put enmity between them and their family. Look again what Jesus says. Whoever does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life cannot be my disciple. In other words, you can't prioritize any of those family members over Jesus. You can't even prioritize your own needs, your own desires over Jesus. You got to be able to prioritize him first in all of those cases. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. I would point something out about this that I've always found interesting. Those who heard this original teaching, I don't think they thought about it the same way we do, because we obviously have association of the cross with Jesus, but those original people who heard it, I don't think they necessarily did. I don't know if they knew what he meant by bearing his cross. We sort of have unique hindsight here. Yes, I think if someone were paying very close attention to what Jesus was saying, they might realize that the manner of his death was going to be crucifixion. You have certain hints within the Old Testament. You know, Isaiah 53, he was pierced for our transgressions. The Psalms, cursed is anybody who hangs from a tree. I think if you're paying really close attention, you might be able to figure out crucifixion. But to my knowledge, Jesus never actually explicitly predicted crucifixion would be the manner of his death. But the symbol of the cross here is sort of the same, whether you knew Jesus was going to be crucified or not, which is torture. Whoever is not willing to be tortured on my behalf, follow me in the same way, is not worthy of me. It's very similar to what Jesus also taught. Whoever puts his hand to the plow and looks back is not worthy of me. Now, when you look at a couple of examples here, you might get the wrong message. He who does not first count the cost. If you want to build a tower, is what he says, and you don't first count the cost to make sure you have enough money to do it, will you not be mocked? If a king goes to war with another, but doesn't first look to see if he has an army that can actually beat the other one, would he not be mocked? Now, you might think that this is teaching against hastily putting on Christ. It's not. But it is making sure that we know what we're getting into. Christianity is not an easy thing. It is a lifelong commitment, and it is a total commitment of everything. When he says at the end there, in verse 33, so therefore any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. Is he stating that every single Christian needs to literally get rid of every single one of their possessions? Well, no. We see counterexample of that all throughout the Bible. If that were the case, there never was a Christian if they are renouncing literally everything they have. But you dedicate everything you have to God. There is not a single thing you ought to own that is more important than God, and you should be willing to get rid of every single thing if that's what it costs. Now that sounds like a lot. It's discouraging almost from becoming a Christian, except we remember this as well. What profit a man if he gain the whole world and loses his soul? We know this. Anything we lose, even our relationships, our parents, our spouses, our own children, if that's what it costs. Although it's hard for us to imagine as much, heaven is worth all of it. All right. Well, that should cover those Luke 14 parables and teachings. We're going to be talking about some more of the teachings of Christ next week. Until then, I love you all. and I hope you have a wonderful week. Bye.